So hi everyone, welcome to our Governance Made Easy webinar titled Linking Risk and Strategy, what it means for your organisation. And that's with our special guest speaker today, Ben Stevens, who's the founder and CEO of Flipview. My name's Sean McDonald and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 minutes. And firstly, thank you for joining us today and attending. We really appreciate the effort you've made to be here for our live event. During the session, if you have any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering these during our session and try to get through as many of these as we have time for, because I know it's going to be a really busy, interesting session today. Finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat for you by answering our 1-minute survey. At the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win our beautiful gift hamper worth $400. Now, for those that don't know much about BoardPro, we are a board software provider, sometimes called a board portal, that serve around 20,000 users around the world. And we enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively and efficiently with, you guessed it, clever software with less time, and we deliver more impact and value for your organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. Now, today we are blessed to have three really top guys with us to present on this topic, starting with Ben Stevens. Ben has an extensive background in risk and strategic planning and has spent over 2 decades working in senior roles across a variety of industries, including the recorded music industry in London and TV, the broadcasting industry in Eastern Europe, and more recently, the placement and telco industry in New Zealand. Ben speaks several European languages and has a uniquely international perspective, having lived in Germany, the Czech Republic, London, Sweden, and Finland. Ben is a chartered accountant, believe it or not, and holds an executive MBA from Warwick Business School. And he has a real keen interest in future trends and their impact on traditional business models, and has spoken extensively on the subject of risk, futurist trends, and business model disruption for the Institute of Directors. Welcome to you, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
Stephen Bowman is Managing Director of Conscious Governance, brings a great depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Stephen has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books on governance and strategy. Good afternoon to you, Stephen.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of us around the world.
Roger Chow is an experienced non-executive director and board consultant, having been chair and a director of numerous private, public sector and not-for-profit organisations, as well as audit and risk committees, and having consulted to numerous boards. He has a strong background in governance, risk management, financial management, and strategic planning. He's also held CEO and general management positions in the health, human services, education sectors, as well as executive roles in the public sector across transport, economic development, health and environmental portfolios. Roger brings strong governance experience, commercial acumen, risk management, and strategic skills combined with a passion for innovation and business development. Welcome to you, Roger.
Lovely to be here as well.
So let me now hand over to Ben Stevens, who will kick us off for the day.
Yeah, hi everyone. We're going to cover quite a bit in today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about Moore's law disruption in the recorded music industry. We'll look at lessons learned from disruption and what this might mean for other industries with particular focus on Chat GPT and AI. We'll look at how risk and strategy are defined and how risk might be the missing piece of your strategy, and tips to sort of effectively make your risk analysis more strategic. And we'll close out with a very short overview of Flipview, which is the platform that I've founded and created, and also finish up with some tips on how to use Chat GPT. We've been increasingly using that with some of our clients. But before we start, I'm going to play, or Sean's going to play a short clip, which I hope you'll all enjoy. It's a great illustration of the power of business models.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door.
Yeah,
$1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler could use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis. And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, Pop-Up! Stop paying for shave tech you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
I know karate, I know jiu-jitsu, I drive like a gangster when I'm coming to...
Look, Gillette didn't really take the Dollar Shave Club that seriously, and after 5 or 6 years, the Dollar Shave Club sold to Unilever for close to $1 billion. And to be clear, the Dollar Shave Club, they didn't reinvent the razor. There was nothing special about the razor. The advertising was very clever and it went viral. But what they did do is they reinvented the business model for selling razor blades. They converted it to a subscription service, which had a huge amount of power. And the irony here, of course, is when you're looking at business models, the razor blade model is used in a lot of industries. Microsoft have used it with the Xbox, PlayStation have used it, Nespresso have used that razor blade business model to great effect. So Gillette, in lots of ways, who pioneered that model, were effectively disrupted by the Dollar Shave Club. But when we look at disruption and technology, often we focus very, very heavily on the technology side of things. But the reality is, in my experience, certainly in the recorded music industry, is that disruption often comes from changes in the business model and how things are monetized. So if you look at the chart, if you see the chart there, you can see the various formats in the recorded music industry. You can see tape, vinyl, etc., being displaced by the CD. But what's really fascinating, and what sort of fascinated me when I was doing a lot of research in London, was if you look at the volume drop off there with CDs, they really dropped off initially with the launch of file sharing and Napster and that sort of stuff. So that technology did have a big impact. But what really had a massive impact was the launch of iTunes. And of course, iTunes created a legitimate business model for people to buy music from, and that model was what really displaced the industry at the time. Of course, that's further been displaced by Spotify and other subscription business models. So often we focus very heavily on the technology side of things, but it's that business model, it's that monetization, and that whole ecosystem that's created with the new technology that truly disrupts. One of my favorite examples of business model disruption is Xerox. Xerox started out in the 1960s, and they turned over, I think at the time, around 50 or 60 million. But by the late 60s, they were up around 8 billion. In fact, they grew so big that to copy something, became synonymous with to Xerox something. And they took a huge risk. So just going back to Xerox, the 914 was a great printer, but what they did was they chose to sell it rather than 30,000 a piece. They chose to pretty much give it away and lease it on a pay per sheet basis, and that was really what propelled their growth. They took a huge risk in doing that. And often we find, I think, when you're looking at businesses that have been disrupted, it's the risk taking or the not taking a risk that has a massive effect. So history's littered with examples of businesses that haven't taken risks and as a result have been disrupted. A really good example of that is Western Union. So Western Union owned the world's telegraph lines, and there was a lot of money in long distance telegraphy. Alexander Bell approached them with his newfangled device, the phone, and there wasn't money for Western Union in short range telegraphy. It was all long range. That's where they made their money. So they couldn't see, the power of his invention, and they turned it down. And the rest is history, right? So the telephone quickly displaced the telegraph, and Western Union effectively now just do money transfers. And of course, so disruption's nothing new. Disruption's been around for quite some time. As that case, as the telegraph sort of case illustrates. But what's changed, I think, and what's really changed things massively is Moore's law. And I think Moore's law for a lot of people is a concept that's quite hard to kind of really appreciate. I think we underestimate the power of Moore's law when we're thinking about disruption. So Brian Krasnick, who was the CEO of Intel, was at a conference about 10 years ago, and he created this fantastic analogy looking at a Volkswagen Beetle and how fast it would travel if you applied the same kind of trajectory to it that you did with what you do with Moore's law, and that's that it doubles in its price performance every 18 or so months. Can anyone hazard a guess how quickly the Volkswagen Beetle would travel after 40 years of Moore's law, but doubled every 18 months? Steve, any ideas?
Oh, I guess around 300,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, you've read the slides. So traveling around 300,000 miles per hour, it would, I think, achieve around 2 million miles to the gallon and cost around 4 cents to make. So often we underestimate the impact of Moore's law, and when you apply it to a sort of analog case like that, I think it's quite powerful.
So can you tell us a bit more? What is Moore's law?
Moore's law was created, I guess, by Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel, and it basically stipulates that the price performance of an integrated circuit doubles every 18 months, and that's simply put why computing power increases so much, and the price of a computer, if you like, computing has come down so much. So I guess that's it in a nutshell. And what we're seeing also with Moore's law is a lot of companies that have been disrupted or that are disruptors, have this sort of exponential hockey curve. And of course, that curve closely resembles Moore's law from an exponential standpoint. So for me, I think it's quite interesting when you look at the pandemic and you look at, I don't know how many people had pandemic on their risk register when the pandemic hit. But for me, Chat GPT is a little bit like aliens landing, and it's almost like you need to have aliens landing on your risk register now. If you think about that example with the Volkswagen Beetle and how far things have come with computer processing, and then you think about Chat GPT, the impacts are potentially phenomenal. And I don't know, Roger and Stephen, what your thoughts are, but I sort of look at this and I look at the recorded music industry, and what happened there with disruption was effectively the value of music to a certain extent. When it was digitized, if you like, it really commoditized the value of things. And David Bowie at the time, I think in the early 2000s, said music's going to become like running water, and it very much did. And so ChatGPT, I think, has a propensity to really strip that value out and commoditize something.
It's interesting that Monica has raised a good point under the chat thing about, essentially what comes first. Does a good business actually look at changing its business model based on the changing needs and requirements of the market, or do they take a risk and change it anyway and hope to bring the market along with them?
Yeah, and I think picking up off that as well, if you're looking at the rationale behind a lot of companies shifting their business model and shifting their types of monetization, it actually comes back to actually capturing that customer value at the heart of it. So if we look back to those subscription services, for example, that were being talked about earlier, you look at things like software as a service with Adobe, with Microsoft, and for examples, they were shifting around to meet emerging consumer preferences around cash flow, around expenditure, around ongoing feedback loops. But at the same time, it benefits the entity themselves that are developing these software programs because it gives them more predictable revenue streams. It engages the customer on that ongoing feedback loop. And it also creates some potential barriers to entry for a number of competitors as well as part of that subscription model itself. And then we've also seen the same, not just, I guess, with those software providers like Microsoft and Adobe's I've just spoken about, but you look at the emerging esports arena, video games, you look at Minecraft, you look at Fortnite, you look at some of these areas. Their model isn't around subscription. It's around that freemium model where you've got those base elements, for example, which are free, such as Fortnite, but yet they're generating millions or billions in revenue without actually charging for that core game. It's those add-on elements. And again, it's appealing to the customer needs where they don't want to be paying to get a game from the outset, but they're willing to buy those add-ons that are those in-game purchases themselves. So it's really that shift around monetization that we're seeing in these companies. And the disruption that we're seeing for these software companies and tech companies is not so much in the tech space itself. It's not disruptive in terms of the technology and the software that they're developing. It's a disruption in terms of the service delivery model and monetization model itself that meets those consumer needs, as Monica's talking about.
And I think the strategic issue in this is particularly boards often get themselves hung up on, look, strategy to us means doing a bit more of the same thing, only a bit better, as opposed to what are the boxes we've already created around everything we do? And what if they weren't boxes? What if we could actually do something totally different to that? What would that look like and create even greater impact in the world, which translates into greater revenue as well too. So it's an interesting thing I'm starting to see boards grapple with is, look, we've done this successfully, and each year we do a business plan, we do a 3-year strat plan, but is it really strategic? And that's, I think, a lot of boards are grappling with that at the moment. Ben, back to you, sir.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, look, I think to your point, Roger, before around the value, the value is absolutely a key part of the value chain and the business model and that whole monetization piece. And certainly in the music industry, that shifted, right? So people saw value in concerts, not in music, and music became the promotion element. So that money, if you like, and that business model tended to follow, like you say, the consumer to a certain extent and where they saw value and where it could be harnessed. The other thing to think about, going back, the other thing to think about is just the pairing of technology. So Chat GPT will become, I think, ubiquitous. It'll start to pair with lots and lots of different things. And the important thing is to sort of embrace the technology. I think one of the funniest examples in the music industry was they tried to sue Alan Sugar for creating the double cassette deck. There was a big campaign around home taping killing the music industry, and you can imagine with Alan Sugar how that played out. So often we fight technology, but there's a strong argument that the more you embrace, the more successful you'll be. Socio-demographics are important. To your point again, Roger. It'll be interesting to see how much we change in terms of relying on AI going forward. At the moment, there's a bit of apprehension, but I suspect that'll change quickly. And then the other important thing that will probably play out, I suspect, is just the regulators being completely overwhelmed, and they tend to be, a long ways behind when it comes to technology. When you're looking at your business model, a useful thing to do as well when disruption happens, I think, as well as trying to disrupt, is to also think about what your business model was at the outset. What did the banking industry look like? What did the insurance industry look like when it was first created? Because certainly in the recorded music industry, that business model in many ways resembles what it resembled at its inception.
And we have a question from Monica.
Mm-hmm.
She asks, where do the panelists suggest directors go to get a sense of what's coming in the future in their industry, in the world, to help shape strategic direction? Big question. Steve, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of great things that they can do immediately. Every second or third board meeting, bring in an external stakeholder, someone who's really good in their sector, who's a bit of a strategic leader, strategic thinker in that space, and get them to address the board about what they see as their two top strategic issues in their sector, the stakeholder. What do they see as the stakeholders' two key strategic issues, and what that stakeholder thinks the implications for that organisation might be on whose board they're currently talking. So you are constantly hearing from other people's points of view what they see as their particular big strategic issues, but also you're asking them to have a reflection on what that might mean for this particular organisation that you've been invited to come and have a chat to. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that's really very good is to actually have staff involved in that as too. Have once or twice a year, have one of the senior staff members come along and have a conversation with the board about the top two strategic issues in the next 10 years in their area of responsibility. And that will then provide the board with some outside thinking, but from within inside the organisation. Very simple things you can do, but it just keeps the board from falling into the trap of business as usual with just a little bit more attached to it.
Thanks, Steve. Simone asks, Ben, what are the regulators doing overseas that you can see happening in New Zealand in short order?
Well, look, in terms of Chat GPT, I think there's been various forums and things that have been set up with Elon Musk and all the rest of it. Look, I think it's still early days. I think a lot of that regulation and a lot of those forums and committees, I guess, there was one that gathered recently, I think, in the UK. They're just starting to get traction. But I guess I'm a little bit cynical. I sort of almost feel with Chat GPT and AI, it's almost like we may end up needing AI's help to sort of regulate itself at some point. I can just see technology marching so quick, when you think about that example with the Volkswagen. So it's quite scary, but it's quite exciting at the same time, depending on how it's handled.
Ben, I think the big issue here for boards in particular is to give some guidance to staff about what's on the table and what's off the table. And so one of the things that we're starting to see boards do now is to put together their own essentially policy on implementing AI. And there's some really good examples around of where there are some policy components that are being generated globally. And even if the board has to make their own up, at least we're starting to think about it. So, for example, do we use our internal organisation's data and allow it to be searched on the web, or do we get something that is internally focused so that we don't have to worry about privacy and other issues involved there? So there's some great guidelines out there already, but each board literally should be looking at those now and giving those guidelines to staff so staff can go and do what they do really well, which is get stuff done.
Yeah, and it will be a little bit like the Wild West for the next 5 years. When any new technology comes to market, the internet was a bit like the Wild West, and it's going to be interesting. It will be very, very interesting. And I guess in light of the technology disruption, all the rest of it, having a good view on your top risks and where you're at strategy wise is pretty critical. One thing I think that's really important is to have a definition of what strategy means for you. It can be quite a fluffy thing. And if you can't define something, you can't fix it. It's hard to work with something that's a bit fuzzy. And so I've just put one of my, there's a lot of definitions out there. This isn't perfect, but that's one of my favorite definitions of what strategy is all about. It tells a story about a Hungarian detachment that was lost. They found a map. They used that map to get to safety, and when they met their lieutenant, the lieutenant noticed that the map they had was for the Alps, not the Pyrenees, where they were lost. And so, to me, strategy is very much around a journey, and all too often, I think we focus on the end point as opposed to how to get from A to B. And similarly, when I first went out consulting in the risk space, a friend of mine handed me a card and said, "This is how I explain risk," and it's a picture of the bike, and your plan and then reality. And for me, I thought that was quite neat because, you think about that definition of strategy being a journey, and then you think about the definition of risk and risk management, and they're both quite closely aligned. And then if you've read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Rumelt, one of the best strategy books out, he talks about failing to identify obstacles and analyze the obstacles as part of your strategy formulation process. And if you don't do that, then really all you've got is a pipe dream. And so for me, in my mind, risk really does help, or good risk analysis does help that strategy formulation process. It helps make a strategy, if you like.
And I think the other good way to bring risk into that strategy conversation is almost flipping risk on its head from being a threat or a weakness towards being more of an opportunity. And I think if we go back to that generative AI concept, so not just using Chat GPT, but Bard and others as well, it's around coming back to that conversation of why do organizations want to do strategy? It's around financial sustainability, it's around value creation, it's around value capture. And if we go back to the heart of value creation, value capture, and actually understand the markets, it then dictates that strategy. So for example, if we look at some of those areas where, for example, for advice, you look at professional services firms where advice has typically been their realm of expertise. They've had years of research, years of training, years of education to do that. That's now being eroded with generative AI, for example, where any person and their dog can go get some advice, which has traditionally been that realm of those experts themselves. So that's kind of eroded from that perspective. So it means that value creation and that value capture has now been transferred. So what then does it mean for the actual role of those people which used to be experts? Their role's no longer redundant. If you're looking at that from a risk perspective, what are the opportunities for them? It's actually in the implementation of that advice as opposed to in the generation of that advice. And you'll see that in healthcare, you'll see that in legal services as well, where you've got generative AI and AI which analyzes medical records and others, but it's the actual treatment around care plans, it's around patient preferences, which is a value add that the clinicians actually provide. So it's enhancing what AI actually provides.
Yeah, absolutely. That's dead right. We'll sort of get to that in a minute, actually. But I think one of the biggest challenges as well is we're notoriously bad at predicting the future. And I've just got some neat examples here. And if you think about risk and strategy, what we're trying to do is we're really trying to gaze into a crystal ball and look into the future. So, atomic energy, if you want to click the next one there, Sean. So that was Churchill that said that. We can just run through these quickly. These are great examples of people that probably should have seen how things were going to play out, and they didn't, And this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, with strategy, risk, and even with AI. It's very, very hard to kind of see how things are going to pan out over the next decade or two. So in terms of my thoughts, and I'm keen, Stephen and Roger, and even from the audience to hear their thoughts on this. These are sort of my thoughts on how to really improve and make the risk sort of process, if you like, more strategic. One of the things I think we tend to focus on, and it's a comfort thing perhaps, is we focus on the artifacts, we focus on the risk register, we focus on the heat maps, the rating mechanisms and those sort of things. And there's a lot of bad publicity around heat maps and that sort of stuff. I really don't mind, frankly. If it helps engage people, that's fantastic, because it's all really about engagement at the end of the day. But what I tend to find when I look at a lot of the organizations that I've consulted to over the years is, the risk register becomes the thing to focus on for risks, when really it should be about action. It should be about, doing stuff that builds resilience or that helps enable a strategy to be executed. And, just changing the colors of risks and adding a couple here and there isn't really building resilience for an organization, right?
Ben, one of the things that we're starting to see boards do now, particularly with risk registers, is to, number one, simplify. Don't give us the whole risk register. Just give us the top 4, 5, or 6 key risks. And then the other thing, the really smart boards are starting to do this, is they then add 2 extra columns to their risk register. They get rid of the columns that are no longer useful, like residual risk and so on. So they're just looking at the really key nuts and bolts of things. But the most important things are the last 2 columns, which is what is the opportunity that comes to us from managing both the potential and the the consequence if it was to occur. So what are the opportunities that raises? And then the next column is where might the revenue sources be? That changes everyone's perception of risk just by looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. And who's doing what at the end of the day about it, right?
Yeah.
So, it's a bit like a SWOT. SWOTs are a waste of time unless people are actually the integral part of a strategy planning process then gets parked and the strategy's over here. Unless you're sort of looking at that stuff, it's a waste of time. I think the people aspect for me is something that I've underestimated in my career. We tend to look at the artifacts, we look at the policies, we look at systems, but at the end of the day, I guess I lean towards if you've got a really engaged group of employees that really care about the business and they're super engaged, and for me that's almost more important than all of these artifacts, if you like. And these are some of the problems we've tried to solve, I guess, in Flipviews, in particular getting that coalface perspective. So risk isn't just the realm of a boffin or the realm of a director, board, chairman, leadership team. It's also about, the people, the staff at the coalface,
We have a few more questions, gents. This one from Rachel. What KPIs should be used to measure the success and effectiveness of AI implementation?
That, I think I'll kick off with that one. First of all, the board has to put some sort of policy in place. For those of you who are interested, if you want to put in the notes at the end with the survey that you'd like a copy of sort of the policies and some of the things that could be put in place, just put it in there and we can send them out to you. The other thing is that the board really should be putting in KPIs more around the strategy. AI is an enabler. And so if we're looking at, it's not about whether or not we implement AI, it's about how it's going to be implemented. And we as a board need to give guidance around that. And so one of the KPIs in there would be that we have clear policies and procedures about the use of AI in all elements of our organisation. That'd be where I'd start off with it. So I think in terms of don't focus on AI as something that's going to give you the tangible results. Focus on how you want to use it first. Let the staff work out how it's going to actually deliver, but let's give them some guidance about what's acceptable and what's not.
I definitely concur with that, because AI is really just a means to an end. It's an enabler. It's not an end in itself. So it's understanding from the outset what the problem is that you're trying to address. And when you've understood what that problem you're trying to address and understanding what the outcome you're trying to achieve is, you can then start to measure those outcomes. One of the ways, or part of those ways of doing that, is through AI, but there's many other ways. So it's around ensuring that you've got a clear understanding from the outside what the problem is, what the outcomes are, and then you can actually seek to measure against that as well.
Okay, for those who are wanting the policies, please don't put them in the chats, just put them in the survey that you get at the end of this, and then we can send them off to you.
Yeah, there's a question at the end of the survey. It's only a very short survey. So just where it asks you if you'd like to speak to Stephen, just put Stephen's name there and he'll send those details out to you.
The other thing you can do, of course, is ask Chat GPT.
If you believe it. Okay, Ben, over to you. Keep going.
Yeah, good on you. We'll just quickly close this out. So the other thing that I think's really important is to not force it. So give people the headspace. It's the same with strategy planning, risk. It's all the same. If it's really forced, then then you get limited results. People need to be given the time and headspace to think and reflect. And a lot of these sort of problems, I guess, and sort of linking strategy and risk are the sort of things that we're trying to, I guess, resolve in Flipview and building Flipview. I founded it 5 years ago, and we're sort of more from a risk platform to more of a strategy and risk platform, if you like, just as we've onboarded clients and built functionality out. I'll just share my screen very, very briefly, and just let me know whether you can see it. So hopefully, has it come through?
It's coming up. There you go.
Right. Yeah. So within Flipview, what we've tried to create really is a tool that allows employees to really engage and collaborate on risk and strategy and link risk and strategy. So within the platform, everything sort of works off this left menu. If you want to put your pillars in, you click on your pillars, they appear. and you just hit the flip button to work on them. Same with risks. The risks are here. You get a summary, you can drill down. If you want to work on your risks, you flip it and you can add risks, edit, or whatever. One of the things that we've tried to do within the platform as well is kind of unique, is link the risks to the pillars. So within the platform, you can link it to multiple pillars. You can run surveys, workshops to sort of really engage your staff, and sometimes members of leadership teams will reach out with their teams and sort of run a mini workshop with them. And then from there, we've built automated reporting, so we can sort of look at a pillar, for example, and see what people are working on, if it's a risk, and where they're at. And then from there, there's a sort of focus, I guess, around execution of strategy. So looking at actions, tasks, linking those to risks, pillars, and that sort of thing. So as well as OKRs. And so, for me, when I look at strategy execution, it's often where things fall down in organizations, and it's because they either haven't really identified the risks well, or they haven't, linked the pillars and activities. They haven't got that line of sight, if you like, from a top level strategy down to the employee or down to the individual activities. And so this bottom part here is really all about the activation of the strategy within the platform. But one of the areas, actually, interestingly, that we've really struggled with, and you can go back to sharing the slide, Sean, is getting people to populate the platform, because it's hard work ultimately. And in the last month or two, we've been using Chat GPT, and the results have just been amazing. So look, I'm not an expert on Chat GPT, but I just thought I'd share my thoughts on it, and in terms of how I've been using it, and hopefully it helps those that are in the audience. I put Chat GPT, you're not cheating, up there, because I think there's a little bit of guilt out there around using Chat GPT. I was helping run a strategy away day for a client a month or so ago, and they'd spent ages on their mission and vision, the board and the leadership team, and I just said it was far too long and complicated. And so we dropped it into Chat GPT, and what came out was just beautiful. You could not fault it. And, you could see everyone kind of almost feeling guilty around using it, but it worked. It was, it was good. So run with it. So don't think of yourself as cheating if you're using Chat GPT and AI.
Ben, if I can just comment on that one, because using vision and purpose statements is one of my favorite topics on this. Just really quickly, use Chat GPT to craft it up, but then spend the rest of your time talking about how we're going to use it and how we can use it as a filter, so that you bring the people back into it. Having got it, now how we use it is something Chat GPT can't tell us.
No, that's dead right. That's not quite that clever yet. The other thing, if you're analyzing companies, I find the descriptions in LinkedIn are great because they're quite short and concise and they're simple. So I'll often drop that into Chat GPT. For prompting, I tend to use conversational prompts. They work really well. But think about using Chat GPT like Google. So don't feed it with too much stuff. If you feed it with too much stuff, like if you feed Google with too much stuff in that search bar, you'd struggle. And appreciate its limitations. I got it to rehash an email campaign and put some humor into it, and it just does not do humor well yet. That's for sure. And that's often a sign of fluency in a language. If you can dream in it and crack a joke, then you're fluent. ChatGPT and AI is not quite there yet, but perhaps it will get there. What it produced was very corny. And one thing, and this might just be me, and how I used it, maybe it was a one-off thing, but I found gamifying it seemed to it's almost like teasing it, seemed to yield better results. So if I gave a company description and asked for the top risks and opportunities, I got a mediocre result. If I said you don't, almost implied that you don't know the company, how could you not know the company? It then produced a much more exhaustive list, actually, which I thought was kind of interesting. So kind of almost gamifying it a bit seems to make it more aggressive and give better results. And that was just, one-off experience with me. So what What I've put here are some of the prompts that I've been using with clients, and it's it's just me tinkering over time, really, with Chat GPT and bringing it into the fold with Flipview. And so these prompts have worked really well for me. So I thought I'd just share them with you. So I often tell it, here's some details about the company. Have you heard of the company? That seems to get a more aggressive result. Then I feed it information, right? So it's like, here you are, here's the information, here's, and then it often comes back and it summarizes that. So you go, okay, that's fine. And then when I look at risks, just like within Flipview, we try and cover the pestle, the macro industry environment, and then kind of some core basics as almost like a checklist for it to identify the risks in those areas. Now, often what comes through is quite generic stuff, I find, when I do that. But if I then tailor it and say, look, make it a SaaS thing, then it's a lot more effectively. So getting that narrowness, again, getting it to identify pillars, actions, and OKRs, you'd be amazed what comes out. Once it's got that narrow description above and done the risks and opportunities, it's amazing. And then sometimes I just get it to tell a story, how was this company successful? 2028, what does success look like? And interestingly, with these series of prompts, I actually put them into Chat GPT last night and asked it to improve the prompts. And that's what it did. It gave me great feedback. And so then I updated the prompts. So you can really work with it in quite a fun way, I think.
We have a few more questions that have come through, Ben. This one from Lee. More of a statement than a question. There is strategic risk in exposing organizations' internal files to an external AI like Bard and GPT.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it may have been, correct me if I'm wrong, but it may have been Samsung. There was a large company where they'd dropped their board minutes into ChatGPT to summarize it. And, we're going to see a lot of this sort of stuff. I know of a company that they had a valuation done years ago and they didn't want to pay for another valuation. So they threw that in ChatGPT and it actually picked up an error in the original valuation. So, but, suddenly it becomes public. Now, I've fed ChatGPT data on Flipview, but it still doesn't seem to know what Flipview's about. So it's interesting. I don't know how it learns or how it gets that information. But yeah, I do think you have to be careful. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of that comes back to that previous question around policies from that perspective as well. Is the company only going to use internal AI versus external? Or if they are using external AI, are they only going to feed it publicly available information? And even if they do only feed it publicly available information, that's still of benefit to the business. So for example, if we look at some of the benefits of something like Bard, Copilot, Chat GPT, for example, it could scan potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of different annual reports for companies. It could extract emerging trends or vulnerabilities in your competitors from that example, which would otherwise take an individual years to do. So even though you are feeding it publicly available information, there's still a huge benefit to organizations doing that as well. But again, it comes back to what the policies are for the organization on using AI from that perspective too, to manage those risks.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Thanks, gentlemen. Now, we've run out of time for some of the other questions, unfortunately. But let me just draw your attention to the guys' details, LinkedIn details, if you want to reach out to Ben, Stephen, or Roger. Stephen for the policy templates that he spoke about, and also indicate that on the survey at the very end. We also have a fantastic lineup of webinars towards the end of this year. The next one on November 16th, Exposing the Hidden Risk of Organizational Culture. That's a deep dive webinar by Georgia Henry and Chris Regan. And finally, we have our masterclass schedule for December, which is how to write better board papers. We still have a few seats available for that. And then into the new year, we have Stephen there with How to Be and Think Strategic, Creating a Winning Board Resume with Lisa Cook, and finally, How to Be a Great Board Chair by Giselle McLaughlin. So thanks, everybody. We hope to see you back for our other webinars leading up to Christmas. And we'll take a break, I think, up until about the 7th of February. Now, just as you leave the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey. Go into the draw to win that hamper worth $400. We'll announce the winner later on today. Thanks again for your attendance. Thank you, Ben, Stephen, and Roger, for your time and information today. We'll see you next time, everybody.